Be here. Thank you so much to the organizers of this tremendous conference for inviting me. And thank you to Rosalind and Alicia for holding up the tech side and moderating as well. My name is Dr. Sharon Saline. I'm the author of What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew, Working Together to Empower Kids for Success in School and Life, and the ADHD Solution Card Deck. Today, I just want to give you a little bit of a background about the work that I do and my approach. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, hailing out of Western Massachusetts. I've been working with kids and families for almost 30 years. I lecture and teach internationally, and I write for various magazines, including AdditudeMag.com, and Attention Magazine, which is through Chad. And once a week, I do a Facebook Live for Adulthood Mag. It's on their Facebook page. It's at 4 o'clock on Fridays, and we address various subjects related to ADHD. I am going to send you right now a link for a free handout based on this presentation that I hope you'll download, and I'll try to send it again at the end as well. So my approach is based on what kids with ADHD wish you knew. And I'm going to minimize my screen because it's very distracting to look at myself. There you go. Fantastic. And I do have the chat up and running so that I can try to address some questions as we go through the presentation. What we'll be talking about today are interventions based on emotional growth, behavioral change, and often medication that include kids in the process, because without their buy-in, there really is no success. And so today I'll talk about ADHD, anxiety, a new approach to anxiety, resilience, practical applications. And throughout the course, you'll hear about kids' perspectives related to ADHD and anxiety, and how we can all think outside of the box to help kids learn how to manage their anxiety more effectively. There'll be a time in the middle of the presentation for questions, and then I have a few polls I'll be asking, and I hope that you'll put your answers. I would like you to put your answers in the chat. So let's get started. What are our learning objectives? Our learning objectives are to really understand how anxiety works in the brain and body, to identify patterns of negative thinking regarding school and life, to learn practical tools for dealing with specific worries, to develop the ability to externalize and reduce the influence of anxiety, and to identify and grow areas of resilience in learning as well as in life. These are stressful and uncertain times. Let's face it, this new normal with COVID isn't anything we're accustomed to. And it's actually quite normal to be experiencing insecurity, fear, and concern about the present and the future. Whether your schools were closed for a while in the spring and now they're still not open, you're learning remotely, or you're engaged in hybrid learning, or some kind of learning in person with safety and distance. If you're an adult, you're working from home, or perhaps you've experienced some layoffs from your job. There's just more family time. And everyone is making huge adjustments to the massive disruption wrought by COVID-19. It's easier to feel overwhelmed, whether you're 5 or you're 50 right now. And kids are confused. Sometimes they feel ripped off about what they're missing, and they basically feel like they have a lack of control about anything that's going on for them. It's hard for us adults to process everything, and it's extra hard for these alternative learners, kids with ADHD, kids who may be high functioning on the autism spectrum, kids who have learning disabilities. So this spring was an emergency. We were involved in crisis management and we all suffered from extra anxiety. Now we can be more thoughtful and prepared about how we want to address the anxiety that we're seeing in kids today. Oh, I don't know why I have sorry about that. Looks like I did the same slide twice, so I'm sorry about that. So what are the 5 C's? So let's talk a little bit about my approach. In my book, I talk about 5 steps to more cooperation and how to build necessary executive functioning skills with less yelling. So the first C is self-control. As adults, we're going to manage. Someone says they don't see the slide.
Yes, Sharon, we don't see the slides at all. And it's happened, glitches. I've done this before in a training. There's a 3-way prong that you have to share your screen.
Hold on. Okay. Thank you for telling me. I'm so glad you're here because I'd be in a total panic. All right. So I'm going to stop my screen share. Okay. I'm going to view the slides. View the slideshow. And I'm going to
You
share.
should see it at the bottom, yeah, on the share screen.
Okay. Now do you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. That's very odd. Okay, I'm not sure what happened. I'm very sorry for that. So I'm just gonna zip back through the slides. Maybe we can start the recording again. I'm not gonna introduce myself, but I will say that these are, these are the learning objectives for our course. How anxiety works, what are patterns of negative thinking, how do we learn to externalize and reduce the influence of anxiety? What are some practical tools for dealing with kids' specific school and other worries? And how do we develop resilience? And of course, I talked about that these are stressful and uncertain times. The typical markers of well-being may be absent. There are all kinds of transitions that we've asked kids to make without a map. And there may very well be continued health, job, housing, and food insecurity for many families, as well as families who are confronting issues of systemic racism as it relates to COVID and in their daily lives. And all of these things contribute to anxiety in kids. So we're now at the 5 C's, so let's start here. So the first C is self-control. You're going to manage your own feelings first so you can act effectively and teach your kids with ADHD to do the same. Sorry. The second one is compassion. And this is meeting kids where they are, not where we expect them to be. And it lies at the heart of positive parent-child alliances. The third C is collaboration. And this means that you're going to work together with kids and other important adults in their lives to find solutions to daily challenges instead of imposing our goals and our solutions and our rules on kids. Consistency. Now, this is not about perfection. This is about doing what you say you're going to do as much as you can, aiming for staying steady instead of being perfect. And we're going to nurture kids' efforts to do the same and to focus on their efforting, the ways that they're trying to adapt, to learn, to make changes, to engage in the process. Oops, sorry. And finally, the last C is celebration. And this is one of my personal favorites because it's about noticing and acknowledging what's working by offering continuous words and actions of advice, of encouragement and praise and validation. Dr. Barbara Fredrickson and her colleagues at the University of Pennsylvania did a lot of research in the, around, I don't know how to say this, in the 2008, 2010 range. And she wrote a book called Positivity. And what she found is that the ideal positivity ratio for kids, for anyone, should be 3 positives for every negative. And as I've traveled all over this country and abroad and done and talked about with people who live with ADHD or who are alternative learners, I ask, what do you think? What do you think the ratio is of for your child? What's the for one every one positive? How many negatives are they experiencing? And what I've heard is anything from 10 negatives to 1 positive, to one student who said to me, well, Dr. Sharon, is it what other people tell me or what I tell myself? And I said, well, both. We're looking for the total. And she said, well, then it's probably 30. So we want to actually counteract this trend, all of this negativity, and I'll talk some more about this later, and how that affects our ADHD kids, and also how we want to counteract the natural negativity bias in our brains by not baking a cake because your child clears the table, but giving them a high five or thanking them or letting them know that you see that they're making an effort. Now let's start with our very first poll, because I'd like to hear from you. So I know that there's a mix of clinician, of family members, educators, clinicians. So my shorthand here is, what is your child or what are you most worried about this fall? And I'd love it if you type your answers into the chat. That would be great. And then I can start to read them. So what are some of the things you're most worried about? Contracting COVID-19 at school or anywhere else, combining work and at-home learning, social adjustment for peers, academic losses, food, housing, or job insecurity. So the answers are pouring in. I love this. Thank you. So I'm seeing some people saying all of these, getting sick, academic losses, a lot of people academic losses during virtual learning, combining work at home learning and food, housing, and job insecurity, social challenges, social adjustments. We have, someone says grandchildren's lack of coping skills when dealing with their anxiety, all over, maintaining organization and schedules while working remotely. All of the above. So you were all struggling. I see a lot of concerns about academic losses, combining work and home learning, and social adjustment. Okay, thank you so much. So let's just do a quick overview. What is ADHD? So ADHD is a chronic condition that's marked by persistent inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity that is sometimes more frequent and severe than is typically observed in children of the same age. There are 3 types. There's hyperactive, impulsive, there's inattentive, and then there's the combined type. Now, ADHD is a biologically based disorder related to the neurotransmitters dopamine and norepinephrine primarily. It's not about laziness or purposeful distractedness. It's a performance-based disorder. And this is really important because it's a performance-based disorder. You can't perform an action or a request at the time when you need to do it because of executive functioning skill deficits. In order to be diagnosed with ADHD, you have to meet 6 out of 9 symptoms in 2 areas of functioning after ruling out medical and other mental health or environmental issues. There is clear evidence that the symptoms interfere with or reduce the quality of social, academic, or occupational functioning. Let's get a couple facts about ADHD up here. So about 10% of kids have ever been affected with ADHD, and somewhere around between 8 and 9% in the United States are currently diagnosed. The male to female ratio is around 3 to 1. The diagnostic rates of adults in the United States are much lower at 4.5%. And we believe that's because the diagnostic criteria is much more appropriate for kids, and that a lot of times people who are adults maybe were not diagnosed as kids, they've adapted to some of their idiosyncrasies, and so they have not sought a diagnosis. Interestingly, about almost 8% of children ages 4 to 11 and almost 14% of teens from 12 to 17 are diagnosed with ADHD. ADHD is the most inherited mental health diagnosis. Around over 50% of adults with ADHD have at least one child with ADHD. And if one child in a family has ADHD, there's a 33% chance of a second child having it. When heredity isn't a factor, it can be ADHD can result from difficulties during pregnancy, prenatal exposure to alcohol, drugs, or tobacco, premature delivery, high lead levels, or a postnatal injury to the prefrontal lobes of the brain. ADHD rarely travels alone. In fact, you'll see 40% of kids who have ADHD have a diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder. 14% of kids with ADHD have also a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorders as a secondary diagnosis, although it's very interesting because if a child's primary diagnosis is ADHD, is ASD, so primary diagnosis is autism spectrum disorder, 50% of those kids also have ADHD. So that's that's interesting. Anxiety, we'll talk a little bit about that occurrence, and depression is somewhere between 16 and 30%. Almost 10 to 20% of kids with ADHD have sensory integration dysfunctions, which means that they process information through their senses ineffectively. And many kids with ADHD also have peer relationships, somewhere between 50 to 70%. Now, everybody, whether you have ADHD or not, has executive functioning strengths and challenges. So the executive functioning skills, which reside right here, if you take your hand and you put it up on your forehead in the prefrontal cortex or your prefrontal lobes of your brain. This is the command center of the brain. It connects and prioritizes and integrates cognitive functions moment by moment. Its executive functioning skills is a term that's used to describe the directive capacities of the brain. It's like these skills are come together as conductors for a large orchestra. Okay, so you might have, instead of imagining one conductor, imagine that there's a conductor for the wind section, a conductor for the horn section, a conductor for the string section. And these conductors work together to help the orchestra make beautiful music. It's the same thing with our executive functioning skills. And we have, as you can see in the slide, there are actually 11 executive functioning skills, which I've categorized into 7 areas. So executive functioning skills integrate memory with what we see and think about right now. And they're responsible for self-regulation, how we manage ourselves, verbal impulse control, behavior impulse control, emotional control. Also how we understand ourselves in terms of relating to other people. When we're tired, when we're stressed, our weakest executive functioning skills are hit first. Now, we all have executive functioning strengths and challenges. I myself come from a long line of super neurotic Jewish women, and we're not so great at emotional control. I get worked up over things. I'm not proud of it. I have yelled at my children perhaps more than I would have liked. And this is something that is one of the things I'm working on in my life. Time management is another one. You may see me at the end racing to get to the last slides because I always think I have more time than I think I actually do, or I want to squeeze more in. But the rest of my 11 executive functioning skills are pretty well intact. For people with ADHD, it's often the reverse. There are a few skills that they're pretty good at. I have several clients with ADHD who are impeccable about getting to their appointment on time. They're perfect about time. They can't organize their room. They can't keep a schedule. They can't use a planner, but they're perfect about being on time. So that's very interesting. So the thing that I want you to think about is for people with ADHD, their executive challenges not only generally outnumber their strengths, but they're significant. Some may have a mild challenge with maybe emotional control, but they'll have a pretty serious, serious challenges with things that have to do with initiation, organization, planning, and prioritizing. We see these significant executive functioning challenges in autism spectrum disorders and other learning disabilities. Executive functioning skills can be divided into two categories: hot skills, the things we use consciously in our daily lives, like inhibition, emotion, and action on the slide; and cool skills, which are much more unconscious: energy, recall, focus, and self-evaluation. Well, it's time to talk about why we're here: anxiety. What is anxiety? So anxiety disorders are problems related to fears and worries. Anxiety disorders differ based on the focus of a person's worry. Anxiety is all about safety and security. It wants to make uncomfortable feelings and uncertainty go away immediately. Kids who have low self-confidence and problematic peer relationships, who struggle with anxiety, may also suffer from academic difficulties, and there may be family conflict. And we cannot make anxiety go away. It is a natural human response that evolved over time from serving a purpose. It helped us keep us safe. We would be worried if we, heard a sound, like we're walking in the jungle and we hear crick, crick, and a tiger comes out. We're going to run back to our cave, right? The next time we walk in the jungle, we may hear that crick, crick, and we're going to have that same fear response, even if it's just a squirrel. So anxiety evolved to protect us over time. So we cannot dismiss it entirely, but our job is to respond to it differently in ways that are healthy and manageable. Anxious kids struggle with tolerating uncertainty, solving problems effectively, and they often fall lower on an autonomy scale. They want other people to do things for them and make them feel safe. We have to teach kids how to be bored by their anxiety, not frightened by it, how to respond to the intensity and the frequency by putting their hand on those knobs and turning them down. Children of anxious parents are more likely to be anxious and perceive ambiguous situations as threatening. That's because there's a genetic component to anxiety, which is more like a predisposition to it. Anxiety is experienced cognitively, so we in our heads, how we think about it, but also physically. Anxiety is adaptive. It helps our bodies prepare for real danger. You have that flash because if it is a tiger, you know you're going to be running in the other direction super fast, okay? There are two organs in the brain. They're very small. They're in the limbic system called the amygdala. Amygdala is Latin, means almond shaped. And this is where our fight or flight and freeze mechanisms operate from. And this amygdala is the thing that leaves its seat in the middle of our brains and comes out and takes control of our prefrontal cortex. It's now running the entire brain. And so we need to find ways to manage that amygdala hijack, to get it back to its seat in the middle of the brain. Sometimes there's a false alarm, and that's a lot of what anxiety is about. There are episodes of fear or worry in the absence of genuine threat, and sometimes there's a very real concern, but the reaction is disproportionate to the event itself. And that's what we want to work on, the reaction. Anxiety reflects all or nothing thinking and a negative expectancy. That means you expect something bad to happen. So how does anxiety actually work? We all receive messages from our bodies about anxiety. There are physiological messages, uncomfortable bodily states, cognitive messages, worried thinking, and psychological messages, distorted beliefs. The amygdala learns different kinds of associations for different experiences. And so one of the challenges is that is sort of being able to detect the difference between a real danger, that car is coming at me super fast, and a perceived danger that the small spider crawling on the floor down there could really hurt me. Where do we want to interrupt this cycle that you see on your slide? So my question to you is, in your experience, where do you normally interrupt this cycle? Please post it in the chat. I want to ask you, where do you normally interrupt the anxiety cycle? And there are a number of messages. I really almost can't read that fast. Okay, great. So where, can you hear me? Can you all hear me? If you can hear me.
Alejandra, can you hear Sharon?
Alejandra says she cannot hear. Thoughts. Right, so you want to interrupt it in thoughts. Thank you, Debbie. So what we want to do is actually interrupt it between the trigger and the thoughts. So Debbie's on the right track. Where we usually intervene with anxiety is between the anxiety and the beliefs. So the anxiety is already happening, and now we're trying to change the belief system, and it's almost too late. Because the prefrontal cortex, this part of our brain, the thinking brain, modulates and manages the rest of the brain and actually needs to run our whole system. We want to pay attention to this for kids who have ADHD or learning disabilities or on the spectrum, because for these kids, their executive functions are naturally delayed in maturing. For kids with ADHD, research has found that their executive functioning skills mature up to 3 years behind neurotypical kids. So there's a lag. And of course, that doesn't mean in all skills, right? And it's not a linear process. You might be really good at keeping your room neat for 3 months, and then something happens and that goes away. And then you start to be really good at using your school calendar, but you're not good at doing both at the same time. So for kids with ADHD or learning disabilities whose executive functioning skills are naturally delayed, it's harder for them to manage anxiety. What I want to say about this is that the brain develops from the back to the front and the inside out. And the back of the brain is what we call the reptilian brain. It's the physiological brain. It has to do with blood pressure and heart rate. The middle of the brain is that emotional brain I was talking about. It's also where memory is, the amygdala. And the front of the brain is that prefrontal cortex. And this is called the human brain or the thinking brain. And so when there are delays here, which there naturally are for these kids, it's going to be harder to manage anxiety. What is the difference between worry and anxiety? And this is important to understand. Worry is about how we think about something. It's expecting a negative outcome. Anxiety is a condition of over-responding to a fear or a worry. Worriers turn what ifs into believable situations. They have very good imaginations. When we're thinking about worry, which is how we think about something, and anxiety, it's our physical response based on the triggers to the thoughts. Worriers are actually really good planners. And I know this because I am one. I have very good future-focused thinking, although sometimes it tortures me, particularly maybe at 3 a.m. around the election. But we also have very creative ways of seeing things. And I bet you see a lot of creative things in the worriers that you work with. What types of anxiety do you see in kids with ADHD? Please put that in the chat so I can share. There are 2 types of worry. There's productive worry, is about worry about doing things. So this is the thing that keeps me up, like, how am I going to do this, that, and the other? Then there's poisonous worry. That was my, sort of the election worry, about things I cannot control that are debilitating. So, there's a difference between productive worry, like, how am I going to get my homework done? Am I going to get to work on time? Will I remember to charge my phone? These traits contribute to the helpful planning side of anxiety. Poisonous worry is about things you cannot control. thunderstorms, whether people will like you, if the plane will crash. And some related to productive and poisonous worry, we see productive stress and poisonous stress. In some communities, anxiety is real because there's danger and hardship in these communities, and because there are issues of food insecurity, housing insecurity, job insecurity, safety. And we want to teach kids how to manage that stress rather than translate that stress into poisonous stress, which is stress about, where something that's real has now been exaggerated to something that cannot be controlled and is globalized. So what are a few of the productive and poisonous worries we're seeing? I see, let's see, biting nails, headaches, those are all signs of anxiety, fear of the unknown, productive worrying, but the grandchild is a 4.0 student. We can talk about that later. Worrying he's always not doing something right. Poisonous worry, worry about school, family members, lack of social life, poisonous worry, living in a personal prison because I'm worried all of the time. Oh, Millie, I'm sorry to hear that. When we go to live Q&A, we'll see what if I can help you with that. After years of working on myself, somebody can let it go, shut down, fear of becoming ill, trying to control family members, feeling out of control, will bully a younger sister, and low self-esteem. Thank you for sharing. So anxiety is dramatic. Anxiety, we'll see tantrums, screaming, tears, kicking, refusal to just engage. Anxiety is manipulative. It wants comfort and certainty. Anxiety is showing us that your child or teen is being pushed into a situation where they do not have the internal skills to manage it. We need to teach them these skills. We as adults cannot close the certainty gap for kids. Life is impossible to live without feeling uncomfortable, and you have to push through these feelings to build competency. And learning to deal with anxiety is all about learning competency. So what are some typical worries for children and teens developmentally? So in early childhood, we'll see separation anxiety between 12 and 2. Up to age 6, we'll see fears of real or imagined dangers, dogs, spiders, monsters, the dark, basements, closets, and children learn how to manage those fears over time. Between the ages of 6 and 12, we'll see fear of real world dangers, death, storms, illness, school. We'll also see we might see some separation anxiety, or what was called specific phobias. So I'm afraid of thunderstorms. I'm afraid of I'm still afraid of spiders. So we want to try to determine how imminent a danger like this is and how you can learn to manage your concerns about those. In middle school, we'll see, of course, there's a growing importance of social status, and social comparisons lead to worrying about acceptance and fitting in. There are concerns about athletic, academic, and social performance. There's worry about how to make friends, how to measure up, FOMO. And in high school, we see all of those, plus added concerns about risk and safety, finding a group that reflects your chosen identity, larger world issues, moral questions, and worries about your future path. Kids want autonomy from their parents, but they also fear that autonomy too. So how do ADHD and anxiety overlap? So about 34% of kids with ADHD have a formal anxiety diagnosis. Is that actually accurate? I don't think so, and most of the clinicians I know, including physicians, don't think so, and here's why. Only about 1% of kids who feel anxious get treatment, seek and receive treatment. And so, you saw in a previous slide that in the general population, about 7% of kids ages, 5 to 17 have been diagnosed with anxiety. So for 34% of kids with ADHD, that's a large amount. And why is it this way? So I personally think it's higher, and here's why. Kids with ADHD are set off more easily and experience more emotional flooding than their peers because they struggle with emotional control because of the delay in their executive functioning skill development. We can see this in kids with ADHD in panic or irrational worry. Kids with ADHD struggle in school or socially or athletically more than neurotypical kids often, not always, and they struggle with accessing and recalling things they know would help them in a given moment based on previous experiences. Most kids with ADHD live with a constant low level or an overt level of making another mistake, of letting someone down, of not being liked, of failure. Over time, what happens is that, you start as a young child, you're worried about messing up. You don't know when you're messing up. You're going to mess up and you're not even aware that you've done something. And as you mature, that fear grows. It grows into a persistent fear of failure. And someone's asking me, is this the same with ADD? So what I want to say is I just want to remind you that right now the category is ADHD. That's the diagnostic formal term. ADD refers to what used to be called attention deficit disorder inattentive type. Now we have ADHD, hyperactive impulsive type, and ADHD inattentive type, or combined. So yes, this all applies to all types of ADHD, okay? When you are afraid of doing something wrong, of messing up, of failing, and you carry that around with you, it grows over time as you receive more negative feedback about the ways you've messed up. And this is why I personally believe that 34% is low. The difference between people with, who have anxiety and ADHD, their obsessions, their compulsions are distressing to them because if there's somebody who has them, they don't solve the problem. For people who have OCD or who are on the ASD or autistic, they like their compulsions and obsessions because they calm them down, they soothe them. And that's an important distinction. So when we're thinking about, differential diagnosis, what are the times when a child or teen is anxious? When are they not anxious? Is this anxiety pervasive? Does it inhibit them from doing things? Is there a family history anxiety? Or is there consistent triggers for the outbursts? Yes for anxiety, no for ADHD. And yes for ADHD and anxiety, right? Emotion creates action or inertia. It gets things started and it keeps them going or prevents you from getting started. So for kids with ADHD, the intensity of their feelings, positive or negative, floods their developing capacities to think about what's going on and gauge the consequences of their behaviors. Stress negatively affects their already overtaxed executive functioning skills, which makes effectively managing and responding to the intense rush of emotions even harder. Research has linked working memory to managing and expressing emotions. And many, many kids with ADHD struggle, and adults struggle with weaker working memory. It's, almost a landmark for ADHD. Weaker working memory reduces coping strategies. You can't access your past successes and apply them to the present without anxiety. And when you add anxiety, it's even harder. Research has found that people with strong working memory are less reactive to events and more capable of assessing emotional situations better than those with weaker working memory. So you can evaluate what's happening and how to respond. Okay. Now, procrastination is a form of anxiety. And it can be debilitating, and kids can't start or finish things. And many kids with ADHD struggle with procrastination. And they particularly struggle with wanting to get things right as a way to prevent criticism from other people or from themselves. Or they avoid things to prevent criticism from others or themselves. And perfectionism, yes?
Sharon, we have a question from Barbara Young.
Yes, I see that. I'm going to get to it when I finish the slide. Thank you.
Okay.
Perfectionism it leads kids to want things to be in just a certain way, so they'll give up if they can't do that. Jasmine, age 12, said to me, yeah, sometimes I have a fit if things aren't right. I want to do everything right, like with the trumpet. I want it to sound good, really good, but it gets too hard. I like to play rock songs, but those are harder. I'll try, I'll quit, I'll try again, get more annoyed, and then I give up. Kids with ADHD often avoid unpleasant things and give up. It seems like a mountain. It seems like they have to climb Mount Everest just to do the task. And it's so big, and they probably haven't succeeded already, like my client, BB, who failed biology in 9th grade, had to take it again in 10th grade, had the same teacher, studied hard for the first test, failed, and came into my office and she said, I give up, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm just going to fail again. And so we worked together. We made a deal. I like to make deals in therapy with my teenagers. And I said, okay, here's the deal. If you go and meet with Mr. So-and-so after school and talk to him about how you studied and how you want to do better this semester, this year, and what you're willing to do, could he help you? I'm willing to call him and talk to him specifically about the results of your testing, because she had just been diagnosed as a sophomore in high school with dyslexia and ADHD. And I'll take you out for hot chocolate. And sure enough, the next week we went out for hot chocolate, and she went to after school every week, once a week, and she passed the class with a C+. It was very exciting. So they avoid things. And finally, there's productive procrastination. This is my personal favorite because I get things done that keep me busy. So I feel like I'm accomplishing something, but I'm still avoiding the big task, you know? And so that's also a challenge. Okay, so I want to go back to Barbara's question. I can't actively participate in the chat and talk to you at the same time.
Question was,
so I'm going to just answer this question. So how does trauma fit into this? If we had a child teen with a trauma background that exhibits ADHD and anxiety symptoms. So this is a really excellent question. This could be a whole presentation in and of itself. So how trauma affects the developing brain is it slows the development down. Often kids who've been traumatized live in that middle brain, that mammalian brain, their emotional brain, and the connections to that their thinking brain and from their thinking brain to the rest of their brain are delayed. And so what we'll see is that kids who have a trauma background and have ADHD and anxiety need a lot more support academically and emotionally, not only to cope with the trauma, but to look at the intersection of how the trauma is affecting their ADHD, meaning it's going to make it worse, and how anxiety is going to affect the trauma and the ADHD because they're all related. If you've experienced a trauma, you will naturally be more hypervigilant, which will then, kind of combine with the anxiety you may already have from having ADHD and not measuring up. And so treatment for these kids is very important. Of course, therapy treatment, but also considering medical intervention, whether it's a prescription medication, because because a lot of times stimulants or other medications that help with ADHD can also help reduce the symptoms of trauma. Okay. And someone said ADHD continues into adulthood. Yes, ADHD continues into adulthood. About 5 to 10% of kids who are diagnosed with ADHD outgrow it. It's relatively small. And a lot of adults, particularly women, who did fine in school, who were great with the structure, particularly up through high school, go to college and things get a lot harder for them because they can't manage, their non-school life and their school life together, or they make it through college again because there's been structure for them, but when they graduate, it's more challenging. Okay, so what do kids with ADHD say about anxiety? And this is really important. Evan, age 17, says, what I mean by anxious is, I remember ever since I was little, I would have really irrational fears of bad things happening or things not working out. I'll just feel like I have this weight on my chest a lot of the time. Just really, really pessimistic views of everything, and that would make me nervous about reality. Maya, age 10, says, my worries start as a hair clip in my stomach and then become a swirling in my head. Sometimes when I am nervous, like in school, if I don't know the answer, I chew on my shirt. Sometimes they say, you're not going to be able to sleep. What if you can't sleep? And that makes me not sleep. It's hard to stop my brain. And what I love about Maya is she is calling it as it is. It's hard to stop my brain. How many of you have heard from your anxious kids or students this phrase, my brain just keeps going? We're going to talk about what to do. Joaquin, age 16, says, I worry about things I have to do and I will forget them. I totally feel panicky because there's something I think I need to be doing, but I can't remember what. Hopefully me thinking about it and keeping it in my head makes me do it. Otherwise, if it's not in my head, it doesn't exist. Now, I don't know about you, but if I have to keep something in my head like that, my anxiety goes up. I need a system. I need to write things down. I need to send myself, set up text alerts and reminders. This is what we have to teach kids because kids with ADHD can't keep it in their heads. They're, particularly with working memory challenges, it just isn't necessarily there, unless it's the one thing they have to focus on and they really want it. Now, let's go on to our second poll. I'm going to ask you, how do you respond to anxiety in yourself or with kids, your students or your children? What is the way that you find that you respond off the bat? Take a minute and put your comments in the chat.
Can I ask you a question? I mean, I heard you say, talk about the ADHD in adult. What did you say about that?
Oh, sure. Thank you for asking. And we'll have time to ask questions. I'm just going to try to get through the material because, I thought we started a little bit late with my slide.
Oh, okay.
Debacle. So what I said is that ADHD occurs throughout the lifespan. There are many people who are women in particular who are not diagnosed until they're, full-fledged adults in their 40s or 50s. Because particularly for women, we as a gender, we tend maybe to be more compliant. We may keep things to ourselves. We may, hide that we're struggling, or we may have managed okay when the external structure was set up for support. Okay, when that external structure isn't there, women with ADHD, men with ADHD struggle to create it for themselves. And I'm happy to recommend some books about that. So let's go to the responses. So frustration, tense up, reassurance, frustration, exasperation or dismissal, all of the above, frustration, exasperated patient, frustration, all of the above. Okay. My heart races, but then I pause and deep breathe and respond. Good for you, Nina. Harder when my daughters with ADHD trigger my ADHD symptoms. Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons that the first of the 5 C's is self-control. It's like if you've ever flown in an airplane or seen a movie where people go on the airplane, the flight attendant says, we're going to put the oxygen mask on yourself, on the adult first, and then on your kid. You have to manage yourself first, and then you can help your kid who's dysregulated. If you're dysregulated, it's going to be, a bonfire. Okay, so I see a lot of reassurance and a lot of alls. Great. Here are some common mistakes adults make with worried kids. You push too hard or you get angry with them. You allow inappropriate behavior, yelling, hitting, tantrums because of the anxiety, or you avoid things because you don't want to deal with the anxiety, or you accommodate something that helps avoid something. And without any teaching of skills, anxiety likes both of those choices. And when anxiety likes something, it shows up more. If you dismiss or you minimize concerns, like, oh, you'll be fine, don't worry about it, it's going to be all right. Anxiety likes that too. It ups the ante. Reassurance, which is kind of a form of dismissal or minimizing concerns, only makes anxiety stronger. Because what we need to do is teach kids how to reassure or comfort themselves. You may not always be around for the rest of your child's life to do this. And of course, this is developmental. You act differently with a 5-year-old than you do with a 15-year-old. But it's still it's still the same general process. What can you say to yourself? What can you do differently that would change this? So here is the different approach for kids with ADHD. Our goal is to teach kids how to tolerate and cope with uncertainty in their lives, realistically evaluate the safety of a given situation and on their own, and build on past successes. This is what builds resilience. When you can tolerate the discomfort of not knowing and being disappointed, then you believe you can bounce back, right? This is what competent, successful adults have. Anxiety is manipulative. It wants comfort and security. It's the reaction to the worry that we want to focus on, not eliminating it. We need to learn how to step back and see the pattern of the anxiety and how it operates, and not react to its fearful demands. Life is impossible to live without feeling uncomfortable. And we've all had to learn how to push through these feelings to build competency. Think about your own life for a second. And if you have a piece of paper near you, write down 2 things that you did in your life that you had to overcome that was super uncomfortable, but you learned how to do it and you are better for it. And if you want to share that in the chat, that would be great. Debbie, you're asking if you can receive the PowerPoint. I sent the PowerPoint, I sent a copy of the slides to the organization. And so I think they should have them and you should be able to get them. It's my hope that everyone gets a copy of these slides. I also want to remind you once again to go to this site and download the handout, which goes over some of the points of this presentation. Anxious kids are lousy at tolerating uncertainty because they're poor problem solvers, and they are so caught up in the fear that they can't get to the thinking part. And this is really true for kids with ADHD because so many of them struggle with emotional control, and it's like a tidal wave of emotion. Reassurance, however tempting, doesn't provide a lasting solution because it teaches kids to rely on other people making things okay. We want to validate instead of reassure. You're right to be scared. You're not sure you can handle X. It's natural to worry in that situation. You're right to be scared about going to school, even in a hybrid situation, because you've been home for a long time. You're not sure you can handle seeing other people or learning in a classroom, or you're worried about COVID. It makes sense that you're worried about that. Let's break it down and see how we can address those fears. When you go towards your fear instead of avoiding it, it gets weaker. It may get stronger to fight back, but ultimately it gets weaker because you're not letting it run the show. So we want to change the relationship to worry by using something called externalizing. We're going to treat anxiety itself like a puzzle. Put your Sherlock Holmes hat on. Expect the worry to appear. We're always surprised when kids have like anxiety meltdowns. Like, why? This is what they do. You know, they do that. Worry says blah, 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 and you can't handle it. Anxiety is an overestimation of the problem and an underestimation of the resources to deal with it. You want to work together with your kids on creating solutions to reduce the power and the influence of their worry. You're going to brainstorm things they can say when the worry rears its ugly head, how they can talk to themselves. You're going to talk with them about logical ways to deal with scary thoughts or circumstances instead of avoiding them. And this may be a game of sorts. You know, I saw a video that was really hilarious. I think you can Google it, on like Monster Spray or something. And it's a video about this can of basically, air freshener that a mom, labeled as Monster Spray. And so every night before bed, her 6-year-old would open the door to the closet because he was very afraid there was a monster in the closet, spray the Monster Spray, the air freshener in, close the door, and then go to sleep. Now, he's not going to do this for the rest of his life, but it helped him feel like he had some control. And that's something that we want to think about. So, anxiety also causes amnesia for successes. So you want to help kids recall a time when they were afraid of something and met the challenge successfully. What were the steps that the child or your student did to cope in that situation? And write these down, because they need to be posted in a number of places so the kids can refer to them. And if your kid is nonverbal and doesn't really read or reading, make pictures. You want to make connections between that situation and their courage and how their determination and what's happening now. The learning process happens over time by reminding kids of the ways that they've succeeded in the past in spite of worry. Anxiety is very talented, and you need to remember this, at erasing memories of courage and triumph. It is our job as adults to hold those memories for our kids and remind them of them. Use humor with worry. Worry does not like that. So you might want to have a worry list before you go to bed. And then, they don't have to think about things when they're falling asleep. Or I really like getting a shoebox and having an elementary school kid decorate it, or even a middle schooler. And I call it the worry motel. So you can put all your worries in there before you go to bed. And when you wake up, you can pick out the ones you want that day. Draw pictures or write a story. Remember, good worriers have really good creative imaginations. So what are some specific things we can do to stop reassuring and start encouraging? We want to maintain our support of, We want to maintain our support of kids in the face of irritating, frustrating, and sometimes really scary behaviors, because your child or teen feels out of control, and that's what that behavior is showing you, and which is why anxiety exists in the first place. We want to stay neutral and compassionate. We want to help them strengthen their disappointment muscle. A lot of anxiety is about avoiding disappointment, other people's or your own. We all need to learn how to tolerate disappointment. It's what builds resilience. When we're dealing with worries, we want to distinguish between the signal, there is something that's happening that I need to be concerned about, and the noise, which is, that's just my anxiety. It's not as big as it seems. Okay. I'm willing to feel unsure. We have to teach kids to say, I'm willing to grab onto my courage and do it. You could also try the worst case scenario exercise. If kids follow their worry to its logical end, what happens? So, well, I'm really afraid that if I walk into the lunchroom, no one will, and I go sit at a table and people don't want me there, then there's no place for me to sit. Okay, that is a reasonable worry. What would you do next? Well, I might cry. Okay. And then what would you do next? Well, then I'd go to the nurse's office and have lunch with her. Okay. Can you live with that? Yes. Are there any other options of what might happen? Well, I could look around for another table where maybe I know someone and try to go to that table. And then what? Well, then I would go there. But they could reject me. Like they may not want to talk to me. Okay, what is that, your anxiety telling you that? Or is that really what could happen? And maybe it's both. So, and then what would you do? Then I'd probably stay there anyway because I'm hungry and I want to have my lunch. So we want to really break it down that way. Most anxieties take over the thinking brain. So using language and logic to calm it down is very important. Dr. Daniel Siegel has this little thing that he does called the amygdala hijack. And the amygdala is my thumb, and this is my brain. And it comes out and it takes over my thinking brain, this prefrontal cortex. And our job through language and logic and breathing and slowing down the system is to get it back where it needs to belong. You have to want to do something differently or want the goal more than you want to listen to the noise of the worry. So what are we going to say to anxiety? We're going to distinguish between the signal and the noise. We're going to ask, we're going to accept the uncertainty. Sometimes things go wrong, but I have the grit, I have the ability, I have the history, I can practice, I know how to be brave. You can say, that sounds like worry. What can you say to size it down, to make it smaller? We want to teach kids some of these internal tools. We want to help kids understand that if they're feeling uncertain or unsure, then they're on the right track. That's what living is about, right? Your worry can show up and you can practice talking back to it by myself or with a caring adult. Specific tools that you can use would be to write a letter to your call, to yourself, dear future self or tomorrow me. If I were in this situation, this is what I would like to do. And you could also write a letter to yourself and say, well, if I were patient Sharon, or I were on time Sharon, what would I do differently? Or if I were brave Sharon, what would I do? And you can also think about the Batman effect. And that refers to this finding that children perform better on a challenging task if they pretend to be someone else, such as Batman, who would take good care, who would be good at that task. So is there a superhero in their lives that they could relate to, that they could almost model themselves after? We want to opt for curiosity over anxiety. Now, right now, there's been a persistent trauma across this country and across the globe. And there are two types of trauma. There's we call single incident trauma and complex trauma. And single incident trauma would be, a sudden death. It might be an illness. It might be a car accident, that kind of thing. It might be some sort of physical harm that you've encountered on a one-time basis. Complex trauma is repeated trauma over time. And so whether or not you think this is true, COVID has created complex trauma for most of us, including kids. And so it's harder to stand in uncertainty and be confident about that something will unfold positively that will get us through that, because it's not really happened. We see, we go outside, everybody has a mask on, hopefully. I was want to walk the other day and I saw a little girl with her mom and she didn't have her mask on and she was blowing those white fluffy things on plants. And she came and she saw me coming and she put her hand over her face like this. And I honestly almost cried. I almost cried. That's a safety reaction based on a traumatic situation. So with the health stakes so high and the very real depression and isolation you may be experiencing and your kids may be experiencing from being socially disconnected or, you know, in a certain kind of quarantine, it can feel impossible to tolerate what's going on. There's a lot of anxiety. So all of this business of not knowing fuels and worsens our natural anxiety. But you could control and lower the volume on that by shifting to curiosity or excitement, okay? Where anxiety shuts you down and predicts negative outcomes, curiosity opens you to possibilities and it helps you rely on your resilience. Instead of I'm worried about, could you say I wonder about? Now, excitement and anxiety are very close together. They're both have a lot of energy, right? In the body and in the mind. Some people think anxiety is excitement with held breath. Could you say I'm excited about going to the grocery store instead of I'm worried about going to the grocery store and seeing other people? Resilience is the antidote to anxiety. Resilience occurs when we take our skills from situations in the past where we learned or succeeded and we apply them to a new situation. Kids need to face a struggle and need it. We all did this. We don't want them to suffer needlessly, but a little disappointment can be a worthwhile growth experience. We want to identify islands of competency, character strengths, talents, skills, interests that kids really like. This helps them feel good about themselves. Daniel, age 17, says, I started ceramics because it was really just a way for me to calm down, because I was also a very anxious person. He also has ADHD, and like school would make me anxious, social life would make me anxious, and that affected my schoolwork a lot. When I had that class, it was very helpful because I was able to relax a lot more and then put out my energy on a creative outlet that ended up benefiting me more in school. Charismatic adults are not, you know, Denzel Washington or George Clooney or Beyonce. You know, charismatic adults are people who have empathy and care about you. Someone who believes in you. You can be this person from whom a child or teen gathers strength. You might be able to help your child or teen identify who this person is and facilitate contact with that person. We want to maintain a growth mindset. And this is what Carol Dweck has written so much about, a positive mindset, qualities and abilities about yourself that you like. Jade, age 12, says, hopefully this works. If not, I'm going to have to find a new way to do it, to be brave. It's hard sometimes, but there's always a way to pick yourself up. We have to address school anxiety directly and set appropriate goals. Kids who are alternative learners with ADHD, LD, and high functioning autism or mental health issues have to work a lot harder at school than their peers. They have to spend time on activities that are both challenging and frustrating and can lead to fatigue or resentment along the way. That can also decrease their motivation. Whatever kids were capable of before the pandemic may have very little to do with what they can do right now, particularly this group of kids with ADHD, anxiety, or learning differences. We want to reassess our goals for this year with them, as well as with their teachers or parents, depending on who you are in this conference here. And we want to create two sets of expectations. One, based on tasks they enjoy that are easy for them and interesting to them, where they naturally have a sense of success. The second set of expectations are based on subjects that are really challenging for them. We want to shore up their strengths and their challenges simultaneously, but not identically. So we want a set of expectations for the things that are challenging and the things that are easier. And that's okay to have different ideas or different ideals for different subject areas. It's okay also to make accommodations for tough classes in hybrid or remote learning that isn't about giving them a total pass not to work at all, but to adjust the kind of work and the amount of work given that learning on screens may or may not be good for this particular student. Above all, we want to stay connected with our kids and make them feel valued as intelligent people whose brains just learn differently. We want to focus on adaptability and growing self-esteem as well as learning. This means that we're going to create collaborative action plans using a gradual approach. Talk together about what you want to accomplish. Set small, achievable goals. And I'm going to move through the next couple slides kind of quickly so I get to questions. You want to monitor your own anxiety and how you feel when your child is anxious or freaked out, and figure out how you can manage that so it's not leaking into your interactions with your kids. Expect setbacks. That is the learning process. We try something, we may succeed, then we may not succeed, then we regroup, then we try again. Think like your GPS. You are simply recalculating. This is what we want to teach these kids instead of it's failure or nothing. I either do it perfectly and succeed, or I fail. There's a whole gray area in between, right? When you're teaching a skill, when you're trying to overcome an anxiety, you want to practice exposing a kid slowly from 5 to 30 minutes a day, less for probably younger children, maybe a couple minutes, 6 days a week, or until the child or teenager seems about half as afraid during the exposure practice. You want to use incentives to motivate if necessary, incentives that matter to their kids. But often doing the task and having that sense of accomplishment is rewarding in itself. Of course, you want to acknowledge courageous behavior and talk it up in the family. Let's see, further tips for successful daily routines. Creating a daily routine, I don't know why I said further, creating a daily routine really, really helps with managing anxiety because kids know what to expect. And so where you use alerts on phones and computers, notification banners, anything that can help kids understand when something is starting and when it's stopping, or give them a warning that something's happening. Kids pay attention to these. If your child is learning at home and you're there, sync up your times for a snack and stretch. So if you can, so you're with them when they have a break, and then you can each go back to doing what you need to do. Consider working alongside your kids as much as you can. Kids with ADHD cannot often stay on task by themselves, particularly elementary school age kids. They need supervision. So they may struggle to read the directions or understand what to do. Teens and tweens may lack the impulse control to stay with the work at hand instead of going to YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, or Instagram. Many of them hate online learning anyway, and their teachers may not require that they show their faces on the Zoom screen. How do you want to set up an arrangement with school to make clear that their participation makes a difference? If you're in the same general vicinity, if you can be, you can monitor what they're doing, if they're getting bored or if they're hyper-focusing. Make sure that you have a list for time breaks and some activities of what to do in a larger one and a shorter one, and use screen time allocations to meet your own needs. If you know you're going to have a big meeting and you have to give your kid an extra hour, that's an exception. Let them know it's an exception. It's not going to be what's happening tomorrow. Or if you want them to watch some TV while you make dinner every night, just so you can think quietly, that's okay. Just make it part of the screen plan. And that's not the subject of this talk. I do another talk on managing screens, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. Remember that things change. So be open to revising plans if it's not working, and ask your kids for suggestions. This collaboration, the third C, is a critical part of any successful daily routines. They've got to have buy-in. And finally, you're going to aim for steadiness, not perfection. Be transparent and clear about any changes. So the 5C solution to managing anxiety: self-control. When kids are anxious, they're often not breathing. This slows down, this speeds up the amygdala hijack. We want them to start breathing to slow it down. Some kids like to draw or listen to music. You might want to create a calm me down box with activities for calming yourself down, coloring, cards, taking the dog for a walk. Make a list of things that can help you calm yourself down. It takes between 12 and 15 minutes or longer in some people for the body to recalibrate after an amygdala hijack. Compassion. I want to say one more thing about breathing. Telling kids to take deep breaths will not work. You can do smell the rose, blow out the candle. You could do alternate nostril breathing. This is my favorite to do with kids with ADHD because it gives them an activity. It's from yoga. You take one finger, you close a nostril and you breathe in and out. And then you switch and you breathe in and out. And you do this about 5 times and everybody starts to calm down. Compassion. You want to maintain your support in the face of irritating or frustrating behaviors that demonstrate how your child feels out of control. Remember that their anxiety is an ineffective attempt to create safety based on their limited skill set. Ask questions to promote your understanding and theirs of what's going on. And I wanted, in terms of self-control, everybody has different things that help them calm down. It doesn't matter if they're what I'm suggesting or not. It's what works. And that should be a list or something that your kids can access easily. Collaboration. You want to talk about logical ways to deal with scary thoughts or circumstances instead of avoiding them. Create an incentive program or break it down into smaller parts so they can try it and then try something for a little longer. Use humor and brainstorm things that they can say together when worry rears its head. And that can be social comments too. Consistency, you want to use routines as much as possible to foster a sense of predictability over certain aspects of life when so much is uncertain right now. These routines provide comfort, but you don't want them to be rigid. There could be exceptions as long as you name the exceptions. And finally, celebration. Notice when your child is efforting, is making efforts and progress on some of the goals you're working on, not just succeeding, but working on them. That efforting is very important for kids with ADHD and those who have anxiety as well, to let them know you're on the right track. And I don't expect you to do it perfectly. It's a live and learn kind of thing. So to respond differently to anxiety, you want to know what your goal is. What is the goal? Collaborate on it. Aim for small successes. Name and talk to the worry. Stay out of the content. If you constantly address the content of the worry, you're going to be playing whack-a-mole with your kid's anxiety for a long time, even with your own. Notice when the worry happens. Notice how the child responds to it. Notice what brings the worry down. This is what we want to pay attention to, the pattern and process of the worry and how to deal with it. We want to teach kids how to use internal reassurance and language instead of depending on other people all the time. My worry can show up and I can practice talking back to it. I said about breathing, we want to create a bridge to success by linking times when things went well and they overcame challenges to what's happening now. Reminders are bridges. Make a list of remembering what was challenging that's now easy. How did that happen? You create a flow chart. This was really hard. I did this and now it's easy. This is currently hard. I could do this or that. And then I want that, I can do that. And finally, I want you to take the long view. Worry, kids grow up and their anxieties will change. And nervous emotions are a natural part of living. So I would like to ask that you stay connected with me. I will put right up in the chat again the downloadable for you, which is a handout on managing children and teens with ADHD and anxiety. It's just generally about anxiety, I think. And if you want to follow me on Facebook, that would be great. Or check out my website at www.drsharonsaline.com. And if you have questions, please feel free to email me. If you would like to bring me to your community, please contact me. I love to do webinars for parents and trainings for teachers as well. So the email should come. Andrea, you tried, it did not work. Let me try it and see if that's the case. So right now, what I'd like to do is to basically ask you to think about one thing you learned from this presentation that you did not know before or that's new to you, and to put it up in the chat, and then we're going to have a conversation. Meanwhile, I'll check that downloadable. It worked for me. Okay. It says advice for parents of children and teens with anxiety. So I think that should work. Okay. So if, let's see, I'm not sure how to see, I don't know if I can see all of you. So I think what would be best, Rosalind, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so I'd like to have a question and answer period. And again, keep posting some things in the chat that you learned. And if you have some questions, if you would unmute yourself, Rosalind will call on you. Let me see if I can, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So hold on. See if I get everybody's pictures. I do not see everyone, but maybe everyone doesn't have a picture. Okay, hold on. Let me see. View. Gallery.
You have to take your cell phone video to see your picture.
Okay. Oh, I'm loving what I'm reading in the chat room. This is fantastic. Great. You did the website a second time and still no email. Okay, I did it on my thing, so I'm just going to put it here again and see if there's a problem with it.
Oh, I did that as well. I downloaded it. I just went to check when someone said that, because I even said something, if you want to contact me.
Yeah.
Maybe the email just didn't come because I didn't see a place to enter the email from that first screen when you download it. But you can say contact me, and if you say contact me, you can put your information in there.
Well, that's very weird. You know what, if you give me 1 second, I will get another download. I'll do that again and just make sure to get you something else. So let's start with the questions and I'll multitask even though I don't believe in it. Okay, so this was okay.
Alicia, are you still there? Alicia told me she was recording some questions too. I might have missed some, so I'm gonna check in with her.
Okay, I'm gonna put this in the chat again. Oops, because it worked for me. Let me see. All right, well, let's start with some questions. If you want to put some questions in the chat while we're waiting, that would be great.
Yeah, or you can unmute yourself as well.
Yeah, just unmute yourself. No, when I do it, I get advice for children and teens with anxiety bonus handout. So I'll just put this back in the thing and you can try again. Great. Okay. All right, so let's do some questions. Anybody have a question?
So I have a question.
Yes, hi Beth. You're the person with you're the grandmother, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So My question, I'm from Maryland Coalition of Families. I'm a family peer support specialist, and I work for with families that
Great.
have substance use needs. But going forward with this, how do you teach an old dog new tricks? I'm dealing with generational ADHD and anxiety.
Okay, next question.
Sharon, someone asked, on top of medication and talk therapy, what do you think about EMDR or neurofeedback?
Yes, hi, Barbara. That's a great question. I think you asked the other question about PTSD, which I also really appreciated. I think EMDR for anxiety can be, of course, very helpful. It's mostly, a trauma-based, it evolved as a trauma-based treatment program, but I think it's also very useful for helping people settle into their bodies, with the tapping and stuff. These would be in addition to medication, and it's not just talk therapy. It's really family behavioral therapy for kids with ADHD. So, my personal belief is that kids with ADHD need two things. They need cognitive behavioral treatment, like how to do things differently, but they also need some insight-oriented treatment, which is, self-esteem. I don't like myself. I don't think other people like me. And those you may be able to deal with directly, or you may not. And but they do need, the therapy has to do a dance between what's happening internally affectively and what's happening with them cognitively as well. Neurofeedback, the jury's out. There's been a lot of studies about it. It's depending who you talk to. Some people think it's great. Usually those are neurofeedback practitioners. It's often very expensive. And so I don't tend to recommend that because insurance doesn't pay for it. If it's been helpful and people want to try it, then I think that's great. But the studies are very mixed.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking. Where do you work, Barbara?
I'm with North Carolina Families United in Greensboro, Burlington, North Carolina.
Great. Fantastic.
We can do one or two more questions because we are on time a little bit.
Okay. What is the prevalence of girls with ADHD and anxiety being misdiagnosed or have an additional diagnosis of autism? Nina asks this question. Nina, that's actually a really good question. So the ratio of boys to girls with ADHD is approximately 3-to-1, hyperactive to inattentive type. The actual rates of women who are diagnosed with ADHD are rising. Because we understand it better and women are seeking help now. I remember I worked with one family and the mom had 3 boys, 2 of whom had ADHD, and the oldest one had severe learning disabilities as well. And so this was many years ago before I'd written my book. So she said, well, I want to learn more about this. And I said, okay, why don't you check out the work of Dr. Edward Hallowell. And so she read, a few weeks later, she came back to session and said, I read the whole book. I took one of my son's pills. Whoa. Like instead of instead of not getting anything done, I actually got like 2 or 3 things done on my list. I have an appointment with my doctor. I think I have this. And so, it's part of why we're seeing an increase in diagnosis among women because they are seeing themselves in their children and learning more. I think a lot of girls, it's interesting, a lot of girls and young women, teenagers are sent to therapy for anxiety. Roslyn, so much. And thank you to Diana Otten who invited me. And I hope that you'll stay in touch and reach out to me in the future. If you would like to invite me to come speak to your community or your workplace, please reach out and check out some of the offerings on my website under the speaking tab.
Okay. Before I end the session,